Petya, can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you.
That's good. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Quite excited to talk.
So the basic premise is we just talk, okay, whatever comes up. How about tell us who you are and then what you do and then a bit of earliest background, like your earliest memories. Where you born, like your memories with your parents, any good memories you want to share. So we can start with something, nicer stuff. Start with something, like some serious grim stuff.
Yeah, I was expecting that question and I did some thinking, and funnily enough, I discovered some relation to environmental issues underpinning that, return to the past and to my childhood and to Bulgaria, where I'm originally from. So when I was growing up, there was this huge pollution problem, air pollution in my hometown. It was in the 1980s, 1980, 1986. And my hometown is positioned, it's Ruse, it's positioned on the bank of the river Danube and almost at the border with Romania. And the source of that pollution was a chemical plant in the city of Giurgiu. That was a plant producing chlorine and I believe sodium for various industries. And it was a transboundary problem, really. And previously, I hadn't given any thought to that. So thank you for inviting me here, because it brings up important memories that have much to do with my current research interest. So I remember that it was a very sensitive issue, because at the time in the 80s, Bulgaria was within that Soviet Union remit of influence. A lot was about social prosperity as framed by that narrative, but the topic on environmental protection, pollution was a taboo topic. And the situation with this Romanian plant, it was particularly problematic because firstly, it was a transboundary problem. Secondly, it related to, two members of the Warsaw Pact, Romania and Bulgaria, and the relations, this geopolitical dynamics were there, and the relations couldn't be endangered due to that pollution problem. So there was a lot of silence around it. And in the meantime, I believe many families left the town because of that. It was a period when we were just moving our place of residence. We got an apartment in a block of flats, which was at the end of the town. And, it was very similar to those blocks of flats that we see on videos from Ukraine, really, this old style, post-communist sorts of residence. And this block of flats was situated at an elevated point above the town. And you could see in the morning when you woke up that blue cloud creeping up, really, and almost reaching our balcony, but just below that. And my parents, they were extremely proud that they've managed to protect me in a way by, finding this place a bit to the side of that blue cloud of chlorine. So that is indeed an important memory that relates to that interest and that I have in environmental protection.
Can I just interrupt a bit? This
Sorry, I get carried away.
Really, fascinating story. I mean, why the cloud is blue?
I believe, I haven't looked into the environmental science of it, but I believe it has to do with the chemicals that are, and that combination of chemicals. But it is very strong. The memory of the blue cloud is very strong for me. Perhaps it may have been, just my own, impression of that phenomenon. And I believe that this issue, it went on for many years. I was a teenager when, in the 90s, when it was still continuing as a problem. And that factory, they also engaged with production of other chemicals for the rubber industry and incineration of waste that was coming from the West. And making that transboundary air problem quite prominent and problematic. Yeah, so this is part of my childhood memories. And yeah, when it comes to later on, my education has revolved around environmental issues, more like using the environment and questions on sustainability as case studies in the context of my interest in European Union and how European Union policies drive change. It's a bit of a pro-Western perspective, pro-EU perspective, but yeah, of course, I'm interested as well in other regional dynamics in other regions of the world. And also that post-communist transitions, which are very important as well. And with dynamics and factors that are mirrored across the world as well. My experience with University of Dundee is quite recent, since I believe 2018. I've had the pleasure of being your colleague, Abdullah, and in various roles. And again, the module that I'm currently working on with students is global politics of sustainability. With climate change and the work of COP27 being a key case within that content of the module.
I'm really fascinated by the living in a Cold War. Did you have any memories? I mean, obviously you must have been very young when things were changing. The Cold War will be gone suddenly. Did you have any memories of those things? How from living under that cloud and then suddenly everything is gone.
Yeah, I don't think that I have particularly strong memories when it comes to that experience. There was this perception of the good and the bad. We had that siren at home, that device. And if there was an alarm, it meant that we were at war. So that was perhaps the most, that is the device that I was afraid from, in case there was an alarm and my dad had to be summoned, because there was an obligatory military service as part of that package. It's a citizen's experience. And also lots of limitation when it comes to freedoms at school, also going to, in terms of exercising one's spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs, access to churches within this Christian Orthodox culture that I've been part of. A lot of atheism, a lot of apathy, cynicism that has remained since when it comes to the rule of law. These are all traces of that communist experience. I wouldn't refer to it as a Cold War experience that are still visible today in that post-communist transition that Bulgaria is part of in particular. But yeah, in terms of my strongest memories are from the period of transition in the 90s, the changes in Romania, and the political changes in Bulgaria as well. But still, the child's interpretation rather than political scientist interpretation here.
This is quite a lot to take, isn't it? Like, Berlin Wall, the Romania situation, I think they killed those people as well who were in power, like Ceausescu and his wife. I still remember those things. I mean, it's like, suddenly everything is like falling apart, or like, I don't know. It just with the children, the young kids, their interpretation of the world, it's totally different. But also, like for me, I was born during the war. For some reason, war is kind of always kind of play a big role in my understanding about who we are. So if anything happens like that, suddenly I get, overly conscious about, is it actually war or is it like freedom? Because both things can be confusing, isn't it?
Indeed. Yeah, I agree. And this imprint on the child and later on grown up is particularly significant. I remember that moment that you're referring to, Ceausescu's trial. It was on TV. It was very frightening for a child. And yeah, I would say for adults as well, for human beings in particular.
Tell us about your school days. I mean, any memories with your, teachers, or, the moment when you felt for the first time you have got some kind of, the political consciousness?
Well, I did study in a Russian language school. So I was learning literacy in Bulgarian language along with literacy in Russian. So there was this strong focus on learning about Russian culture, Russian songs, Russian fairy tales, Russian myths as well, which I do cherish. And but I did kind of welcome the change and the pro-Western orientation, and I did enjoy the difference that it has brought in many ways at many different levels. My recollections from school is something that is really broad. There's nothing in detail that I can recollect. It was extremely busy, extremely serious, and there was much more discipline in comparison to what I see is happening nowadays, particularly in British education. But I don't think that I've been subjected to political socialization as a student in a Bulgarian school. At least this is something that has not, I don't find it has had an impact on my worldviews as such.
And then obviously you are moving on with your life. And then at what point you decided that you needed a PhD?
Well, it was a very interesting time, really, because at the same time when I decided to start my PhD, I was also successful in an application that I had filed with European Commission for an in-service training with Director General Regional Policy. So I was accepted for that traineeship, and at the same time I was also accepted for that PhD. So it was indeed contrasting the policy-related role to the academic role. But it is not necessarily a contrast. I came to realize that these two roles can be interrelated and integrated, really. Research can go and should go hand to hand with practical experience at the level of policymaking. And yeah, that traineeship brought a lot of insight into the policymaking process within the European Commission. And I was engaged with the portfolio of FIROM at the time, Croatia and Turkey, and the way that they were preparing their environmental operational programs. It was extremely interesting to see that the key components in these, the key contentious issues. I was taken on a mission to Ankara as well in the context of that traineeship. And this, in a way, inspired my research and somehow made it live. But in terms of the rationale for that particular research, again, it has always been the importance of the policy problem here, something, the existing policy problem in reality that requires research and academic analysis. This has been important for me. My dad, he's always disapproved of his children working in academia because of that concern that academics are absent-minded, they lose touch with reality. So that's why for my PhD, the key theme was waste management and the ways in that a key European Union waste directive, the landfill directive, was implemented. So I thought, okay, you cannot escape from taxes and waste. This will keep me close to real life. And it has, to be honest. Going to a landfill, looking at taking in the practicalities of waste collection and of waste disposal can help in abstract academic discussion. So yeah, this has been my PhD experience, more or less. But publications are still forthcoming.
Good. Like that's like a slight comment about your father, talking about academia and the absent-mindedness. Like in my case, I'm the most hated person in my whole family.
Oh dear.
Absolutely, they have got no respect for me because first of all, they think that I do nothing. I'm just lazy, So academics don't do anything, just on the computer, like, I mean, I don't know, like they think that this is just like, he's just making up things, like, I mean, he thinks he's busy, but he's not.
Indeed, people have the license to interrupt at all times.
Any kind of serious family business, they even don't bother to invite me as well.
Sorry to hear that.
Which is very good, that means they actually just leave me alone,
Yeah, the silver lining here, Abdullah.
So, like, can you just tell us a bit more about this like Turkey experience? Like, do you mind telling us a bit of like the timeline? Like, what kind of timeline you're looking here? Like, is early 2000 or like 2010 onward? Like your assignment in Turkey? When you did those?
Let me think. It was 2008.
Okay.
Yes, 2008. That was the time of my traineeship, and also that was the start of my PhD, which I completed 4 years later, 2012.
Trying to connect, like whether there's any kind of, that's the time when the climate politics, they're talking about the Kyoto Protocol, and those things were a big thing during that time. Do you remember any of those things, that how the Kyoto Protocol, created this division in the world that, if you're developing countries, you'll not be punished, but if you're a developed country, you'll be punished because you did the bad thing. Those kind of politics were quite big during that time. Or your work was not involved in that kind of things at all?
It was not, but one can remember these critical moments when it comes to the climate regime in particular. And I do remember around that time the negotiations around the Kyoto Protocol, and which is in fact one of the key agreements within that regime, starting with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change earlier on. And later on, 2015, we had the Paris Agreement. These three key texts, in a way, underpinning the legal framework, constituting the legal framework of the climate regime, with all its promises and disappointments, I'm sure.
Since I've been doing podcasts, like the climate politics always there, and I invited a couple of climate. They're not climate scientists; they call themselves more like climate sociologists. How the climate, impacting the social life. So that's very good. But at the same time, the people who actually go to those, these climate conferences, I'm not sure. What I found that they're quite reluctant to talk. If you invite them, they will say that, hey, okay, I will make time for you. And then they will not eventually. So that worries me. Sometimes I feel, what's going on? Why they're not, willing to talk about their experiences, because these are the people who went there and they try to negotiate either for their country or for some organization, whatever it is, but they have those lived memories. And I think people like me would be really interested to know what actually going on there.
Yeah, I think there are many elements to that, and it is a very important question on a number of levels, really. Firstly, it is very much about the truth and the way the truth has been a factor in that climate change regime, really. Because we're well aware of resistance to recognizing, denial of the problem of climate change, which has been evident at various levels when we talk about business, when we talk about politicians. But the science of it has been with us since, I believe, the beginning of the 19th century, 1824, the greenhouse phenomenon. There has been, as Antonio Guterres has flagged, and also I did listen to Al Gore's speech at the start of COP27 and Biden's speech. Science is devastatingly clear when it comes to the environmental dangers, and also social and economic ones. And the implications when it comes to equity, the relations between the developed and developing countries. So many dimensions to that problem, a wicked problem of climate change. So one of the key reasons perhaps is the truth and the attitude of policymakers towards that truth, to what extent it had been covered for many years, to what extent there has been transparent communication with the public on the dangers of climate change. For me, it is one of the key problems with the climate regime, attitude to truth, a fundamental one. Then another perhaps relates to the sensitivity when it comes to equity, the question of equity, the relations between developed and developing countries, and that, again, underpinning issue of responsibility. Who is responsible for the climate crisis? Who is responsible for environmental protection as such? That is common but differentiated responsibility. Who is in charge of sustainability and the environment? And then who is responsible for greenhouse gas emissions? So yeah, this is another element here to that puzzle, I would argue. When we think about the effectiveness of the regime, we see that it started at the beginning of the 1990s, and we've seen the various treaties, the various theatrical summits that have been part of that regime. And even in the prelude to COP27, there were comments, well, we've had 26 of those, what is the outcome? What is the value of having these performative experiences? So that's when it comes to addressing, in fact, that problem. I got a book by Greta Thunberg. It's not an advertisement, the climate book. And there's an interesting graph here showing exactly the increase of carbon dioxide emissions and the timeline of these agreements and the different COPs that we've had. A very clear visualization of that problem of questionable effectiveness in a way.
I really don't want to get drag into the complexity, all those theoretical thing. It looks like the people are confused. That's why people are taking unnecessarily bad side of the story. I mean, what do you think? Like, what's the problem here? Like, this communication. So if you are a climate expert and you care about climate justice, I mean, are there simple messages there? I mean, just to tell people that, okay, this is my 1 minute talk to you, and then see what you feel about that. these are my 10 bullet points. I don't want any kind of response from you, but just to think about that. Do you have any of those like 10 or 5 bullet points about the technicalities?
Yeah, I agree with you that perhaps having a simple message would be one of the keys to addressing the problems of that climate change regime. But I don't think that there is a simple message when it comes to that. And it is a responsibility of various stakeholders at various levels to educate themselves and to get rid of apathy, really. It is about the citizen, it is about the consumer, it is about the politician and the scientist, it's about the engineer. Of course, simplicity here would have helped. But the climate change problem has been called the mother of all issues. And looking at Biden's speech or Al Gore's speech, it is about security, it is about the economic system. It touches upon every policy area that one can imagine. Perhaps close to that bullet point approach is the summary of the latest report of the United Nations Environmental Program, the emissions gap report. It was issued a week or two ago, just prior to the start of COP27. And there were two key messages, and at least this is my take on that, from that report. First, that the target of 1.5 degrees, that was the aspirational one as of the Paris Agreement, cannot be reached. That is the truth. We are not going to meet that target according to the findings of that report. And secondly, what is required to meet that target? What is required to meet 2 degrees Celsius or more, in fact, is an urgent transformational change that would touch upon the economy, that would be so fundamental that it would have to transform our society, it would have to transform the energy portfolio as well, the way that we do production within the industry, the way that we build. So all these key industries feature in that report. Of course, the recommendation is to get rid of fossil fuels, which is something that, as I've been following negotiations in Egypt over the past week and a half, there is a lot of talk on phasing down fossil fuel consumption, but I don't think that it has been reflected in any draft texts as of this point. And perhaps I had a look at some analysis. They're expecting some drafts to surface tomorrow, judging by the dynamics, by comparing the dynamics with COP26. So the expectation is that there will be some more specific drafts tomorrow, but as of this point, unfortunately, there have been more like indications as to a lack of consensus on key themes like loss and damage, for instance. But yeah, so these are the key messages really that should be among the bullet points.
Like one of the things I really struggled, when you talk about, this 1.5 degree or 2 degree, and like above as like 19th century's level. I mean, can you make it simple, like, for us, like, what does it mean, like 1.5 degree? And if it reaches 1.5 degree or 2 degree, it says, then the situation will be, you cannot come back from that. So that's the serious situation, isn't it? But at the same time, we really don't understand, like, what does it mean? Like, so like from here to there, and then, no comeback.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and also that was another point that I did forget. It is the jargon, and it's not helpful for political scientists who try to find their way in that environmental jargon as well. But in terms of consequences of that, I would say in Britain in particular, the Stern report was very clear on the consequences when it comes to, increase of temperature, and what these consequences will be in terms of, at the level of environmental disaster. So we can look at this at various levels. When it comes to the environment, increase of temperature that would lead to calamities, like floods, droughts. Then we can easily imagine what the social consequence would be in different parts of the world. It is about the, also security challenges that would emerge in relation to that. Climate migration, one of them in particular. Scarcity of resources, food, water, and the political and economic impact as well is there, isn't it?
The melt of the, all those ice in the Arctic. So if you reach like 2 degrees, will melt so much ice. We're talking about billions of tons of, it kind of makes sense that why, why if you go to that position, why it will be difficult to retract from that position.
Well, because in the jargon of environmental science, it is about the change that humans have brought to the climate. It is about reaching tipping points. And there have been a lot of simulations of reports, for instance, of the IPCC, in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And their simulations is to, for instance, the rising of sea level, as you're talking about that consequence here. But there's also, I would say, the problem is also related to that unpredictability that comes with tipping points and crossing planetary boundaries. That is another way to frame that, chain that may be triggered when it comes to environmental consequence. So reaching these tipping points comes with a degree of unpredictable consequence environmentally. And to what extent, that's why we're discussing loss and damage, and they're negotiating on that at COP27, because indeed should be differentiated from discourses on mitigation and adaptation. There is policies and states need to be prepared for the negative effects of climate change that are forthcoming, but loss and damage is about the unpredictable consequences once these tipping points are reached. So at least this is my take on that.
We bring this loss and damage thing. This is quite a new jargon. Again, another jargon they are trying to use it. It's basically, they have got this $100 billion, isn't it, every year to cover those costs. So if you see that, if you look at the African continent, this is the continent which is suffering the most, but also they are the least emitters in terms of, carbon footprints. I mean, you can see these are the questions at the very core to the humanity, what we have become. But at the same time, the people who are doing the crime, they're making serious amount of money, billions of dollars. So the fossil fuel industry is just it looks like sky is not even limit. How much profit they can make.
I agree with you. I agree. That's why I started with that question of the truth, and one can't ignore and should not ignore the part of the fossil fuel industry when it comes to climate change denial. And this is something that we have to talk about, and also the importance of worldviews, the importance of ethics when we discuss that question of equity and responsibility, and that burden that is currently, and that will be the experience of the developing world, and the case of Africa, as you're saying. And certainly here, talking about ethics, talking about worldviews, is not merely, it shouldn't be part of rhetorics. It should underpin policies, state policies. It is on the one hand, and also it is important because on the one hand, it relates to the way we organize our human world, our states within that world, but also it is about our relationship with the natural world, climate change, and any other environmentally related problem. It's not only about the humans, it is about the relationship between the humans and the natural world. It is, and the extent to which, these ecocentric views are reflected in policies is significant, I would say. And going back to what you mentioned in relation to the presence of fossil fuel companies, and perhaps you saw that tweet by Greta Thunberg in relation to COP27, that she did highlight that the representatives of fossil fuel companies were more than representatives of the 10 most vulnerable states of the developing world. And it was as if inviting mosquitoes to an event addressing malaria. So I thought that was an interesting tweet. Unfortunately, reflecting a really, scary reality, that presence of the fossil fuel industry there as well, in the context of negotiations at various levels.
I'm like more into the radical politics, like radical left, radical, Black consciousness. I've been doing lots of, this kind of activism in my own life. And some of the things are just like, make me so angry. Look at even look at this like COP27 venue. It's like, Sharm el Sheikh. This is one of those like, most touristy place in the world, as if like they're going for holiday. A bunch of, corporate, CEOs, like, all those state leaders going for this kind of holiday and then have some good food, good wine, and then come back home with absolutely nothing about, like to do any kind of justice for the most important thing of our human history we're dealing with now. And if you look at the other thing is like, I saw, because it's such a corporate event now, one of the biggest sponsor for COP27 is, do you know which company?
Coca-Cola, isn't it?
Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
They're the biggest, one of the biggest emitters. So they're very good on, plastic, they love plastic, and they're the biggest sponsor for COP27. I mean, what's this about? I mean, what's going on?
Well, it was similar with COP26 in Glasgow when you look at the sponsors for that. But I don't think they, at least judging by evidence that emerged from week one, I don't think that they're having a lot of enjoyment when it comes to food and drink. It has been reported that, there have been problems with access to food. There were, somebody said that raw sewage was released in one of the zones. I'm not sure whether it was the blue zone or the green one. So there have been issues when it comes to that experience, surely. And I also read somewhere somebody saying that the location was similar to Vegas, but a bit worse. So you have that different takes, different views on the experience. I see where you're coming from. I see why one can be unhappy about the process and skeptical about the value of these gatherings. But I personally, my personal view here is a bit brighter, I would say. I find that international action is, even if, you know, well, characterized by a lot of challenges and having a lot of baggage there, like, for instance, what we discussed in relation to the attendance of fossil fuel companies. It is a forum for discussion, and it is an important one because key principles are there, are outlined. Negotiations can produce positive results when it comes to the environment. Perhaps one of the key regimes that has been considered successful is the Montreal regime, the ozone regime. So, well, the climate one has not been as successful, one can argue, but perhaps we're at a turning point. Because since COP26, we see a reference to fossil fuel subsidies. We see a reference to, phasing down of fossil fuels. We see the pledge to reduce methane emissions, which methane is much more potent than carbon dioxide. Also, when it comes to speeches, I know that Biden's speech was very criticized in terms of the manner it was delivered. But it had very important components, elements I found. One of these was, in fact, that it did include reference on legislative change in the United States in relation to measures taken at the state level in relation to addressing climate change, going into the detail of infrastructure for electric vehicles. So we can see that tangible evidence of effort when it comes to that. Also a reference to ecosystems and that more holistic approach of ecosystems underpinning the climate, underpinning the economic development, the social development being fundamental to these. And also the link between climate change and security. It is no longer perhaps a question of low politics, but more one of high politics. And these are just a few kind of points from the top of my head that
I'm quite critical about these people. I've got absolutely no respect for people like Biden, like Rishi Sunak, or any of those like first world countries' leadership, because most of the time they talk or they do things because they want to win election, or like try to mobilize people behind them to win the election. It's nothing to do with like global justice or about the emancipation of the things we are facing over centuries. Most of these things, I see like how you are very, obviously the way I know you, Petya, you are a very positive person. You have lots of goodwill for humanity, for people, public, our well-being. But I came to a point because I came from Bangladesh. I know like my sister was visiting this summer here, and then she was saying that Bangladesh is just not. You just can't live there anymore. The temperature is like so high. The people's lives are miserable, in terms of how hot it can be, how rainy it can be, how windy it can be, and then how toxic the environment itself is. It's like, you just cannot breathe there anymore, you know. And you can see that the overall, like, you know, your existence there, it's just like continuous frustration. So sometimes, you know, when I get sick, you know, because my big sister is like kind of almost like my father figure, because I lost my father at early age. And then, you know, she always cares about us. And then she always thinks about us. No, why you are coughing, you know? I feel guilty that, you know, like what she's going through there and what I'm going through here. It's just unbelievable. No? And then her goodwill for my children, my well-being. You know, when she's like going through this whole process, the whole country is going underwater. It's not going under, it's like going under. I don't know what it is, you know, what it will be in like, you know, next 10, 15 years time. And you know, so these are the people are coming here and then saying lots of good things about us, about our existence. They're taking so much now, so much, you know. So the Pakistan, like 1/3 of the country, just like under the water, especially South Asian countries. So they're like one of those epic center of the climate disasters. And you can see like when you have this conference like in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, where like the protesters banned for last almost 10 years, you know, like, you know, so why you are doing this? Why the climate, this kind of, you know, COP27 or COP28 is not happening in places like Bangladesh, in the, you know, in the coastal area where, you know, there'll be 10 feet high tsunami. How about that? We'll have conference there and we'll invite you there and you will be there to talk about climate politics. Let's do it. I'm getting angry now.
Well, we see that leaders can go to dangerous zones. If we look back at the Russian war in Ukraine, we had leaders visit Kiev. So this is perhaps something that it's an idea that we may see come to fruition. Your idea, but yeah, I see your point as well. And isn't this the logic of having the different COPs in different regions as well? You know, the next COP is going to be where in the United Arab Emirates. Yeah.
If you look at the list, I'm pretty sure that they're like looking for places like, you know, California, you know, or like Las Vegas, or like, you know, Montreal, or like Berlin, you know, like, you know, the top places where people go for holiday, you know, enjoy the food, the wine, and then, you know, the things going on. There are lots of history there. It's all this bullshit rather than, you know, the actual places, you know. How about like COP28 in somewhere in, I don't know, like, you know, sub-Saharan African countries? See, like, I mean, let's see like what's going on there, rather than, you know, this like showcase they're doing. The bunch of corporate companies are going there, and behind the scene, you're writing checks for, you know, subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. I see, like, I think UK is the top in European countries in terms of giving subsidies. I think close to £10 billion.
It is one of the bones of contention there, isn't it? And Rishi Sunak was not planning to go to COP, so.
I mean, I was so furious about it. You know, he was saying that, oh, I need to find time in my diary. You know, suddenly his diary is full, but within 48 hours, suddenly his diary became empty. How does it work? Like, I mean, how it became full and how it became empty? So it's got nothing to do with anything, isn't it?
Yeah, perhaps, but I try to kind of, as you say, I try to be positive. I wouldn't call myself an optimist, but I'm trying to be positive here. And, you know, I've been trying to follow all these, it is a complex web of events, really. And it's difficult to follow these at the different COPs and the negotiations at so many levels. And I particularly kind of appreciate the events, the EU side events, and the seminars taking place online. And there are a few that I particularly enjoyed listening to. And you know, I believe that these some of the negotiators at the level of technical conversations, they do make a difference. And this is where the importance of good understanding of science, of scientific facts is, fundamental. And it is not always there. For instance, I listened to, I believe it was the UK representative from COP26, Richie Young. So what he was saying is that the way we use environmental facts is more like a drunk person leaning on a lamppost for support rather than illumination. So it was a quote of something that I thought it was a very good representation of what we've been experiencing when it comes to that whole narrative around negotiations and the way science is harnessed in these. But, going back to these dynamics between developed and developing countries, and your first-hand experience in particular with your sister, and I've also have had friends in Pakistan as well. It is really something that these dynamics are particularly contentious, aren't they? And when they discuss financing, transfer of finances, transfer of technology, we can't help realizing that there isn't a clear definition of what that financial help, financial assistance should look like. There isn't clarity as to the terms of transfer of technology as well. And we see developed countries preferring vague references and developing countries requesting specifics. These dynamics are clear, but particularly referring to Biden's speech, again, going back to that, I believe that state effort in states within developed world countries is important when it comes to implementation. And implementation is problematic in developed countries as well. It's very problematic indeed. And prior to thinking about, transferring of finance, well, not prior, but in parallel to discussing transfer of finance and technology, perhaps there should be establishing of good practice when it comes to implementation in these countries, and the UK in particular. There's a lot to be desired when it comes to that isn't there. Changing the logic of the way that the economy works. We can no longer rely on that broken economic model that we've seen. And the change, that transformation when it comes to the economic model, the social model in the developed countries is fundamental, and also fundamental for that interaction with developing countries as well.
When I was following during this midterm election, like some of those people who are trying to get elected for Senate job, or they're the lawmakers. It's like unreal politics, what's happening in America, isn't it? It's like, these are the people who think, now they think that, bring back coal industry, climate change is hoax. So now these are like mainstream. So these are the people who can be lawmakers. And, the people will control actually the houses, they can block any kind of things, which can actually bring some kind of climate justice. So it looks like America's goodwill for the world in terms of climate justice, but also they have to be careful about what's happening in the domestic politics as well. Because if these people are the mainstream politicians in their own society, then that's quite like the way I see it. It's like apocalyptic scenario. Like these are the people in charge of defending this planet from this impending catastrophe, which will be, unfolding in front of our eyes. These people have got no compassion for those things.
Yeah. Well, it's this seminar that I previously told you about, that was delivered by Professor Madeline Cass, climate anxiety. That's what we sort of touched upon at the end during the question and answer session, whether there have been surveys of climate anxiety among politicians, or do we talk about still climate delusion when it comes to their attitudes to the challenges of climate change. And I agree, we shouldn't be complacent when it comes to that attitude, because this is, in fact, what matters in constructing policies and implementing policies in the States or in a country like Bulgaria even. It's not only about strategies and programs, but they need to be transformed into real action on the ground that would have impact, some sort of meaningful impact. And yeah, we can't forget Trump's tweets as well, nuking hurricanes, or that was extremely environmentally potent solution. And what else? Yeah, and the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, a highly symbolic one, in the way underlining, flagging the importance of key states, leaders, and the role of veto states when it comes to negotiations and draft texts as well. Luckily, from yesterday, we do have, in a way, of restart of the US-Chinese conversations on that. That's a sign of optimism, isn't it? You're quiet there. You're quiet.
No, I mean, because the problem is, no, I don't trust these people because they have got other things in their minds, something totally else. Like, I mean, I do like, politics of the, I don't know, the politics of the people who are oppressed, their politics. So the Middle East is a big part of my understanding about how we actually discuss our society, the human history and all those things. So like one of those things, like I always, whenever I see Al Gore, because part of him, he's a big guy in the climate politics, but he has got absolute no understanding about the other people, the people from Middle East, people from, third world countries. He has got this like very famous speech. He says that, like I think during his election campaign, he was saying that because in American politics, Israel is a big thing, but at the same time, there's a serious blind spot about the other, the Palestinians, whose lives being decimated for last, 70 years, 80 years. So one of his famous speech, he was saying that he was very proud that America is the first country who recognized Israel just after 11 minutes, their proclamation of their independence. That's fine. But at the same time, there's another story there as well, that the 2/3 of the Palestinians lost everything. They could not go back to their home still. So that story he did not tell. So he just told the one part of the story, but the second part of the story is the total capitulation of a community that's gone forever. And they're still struggling to get some kind of, home for them. So you can see, like, so these are the people who have got serious blind spot in terms of the other. So when they talk about other, I've got serious reservation about these people, whether they should genuinely have any kind of goodwill about this thing, because these people have got serious blind spot, it gets bigger every year and every year. And then suddenly he became a big voice for climate justice. So like when you see like the person, when you analyze a person in full, then you can see there's like half of him actually don't understand who we are. You see, so like those things are also very problematic for me. Because when you talk about climate justice, this is a collective cause, isn't it? Everyone's cause. It's not like, just like part of it and then don't need to worry about the other part. But this is the part, you have to take care of the whole part. If you don't, then that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. This moral responsibility should be part of the whole package. It is part of the whole endeavor, shouldn't it? Yeah, certainly. I agree with that. Absolutely.
I'm like more cautious to call them leaders, because I can see, these are extremely like selfish people, extremely selfish people. They care about themselves rather than care about anything. No, perhaps no, these people even don't care about, the things they talk about. It's all about, their own, things, like, their own, like, glorification, like another, like, Nobel Peace Prize, perhaps, or something else,
Well, well, let me then ask you a question.
Absolutely, yeah.
Don't you see that there has been, well, to what extent do you see that there has been a shift in public attitude as well when it comes to discussing this, the climate initiatives at international level?
Mm.
Do you still feel that there is a lot of apathy, or can we really perceive that a shift, a change in the air when it comes to that?
Even the part of me, like the only hope I have when I go to my class, I see these young people. They have got lots of goodwill for this planet, So the young people, the young generation, like people like Greta, and you can see how she's being vilified throughout, the media, the everywhere, as if she's the most evil person in this planet. I mean, what's this about? You see, so I think my absolute hope is with these young people, their idea about the world, and I see the compassion, I see the kindness among themselves, and that gives me hope. Not like Al Gore or like Biden or Trump or like Putin or like Xi Jinping. I mean, these people have got absolute no interest in anyone's well-being or whatsoever. And you can see like the Americans' politics or any other politics, it's just like, it's a corporate kind of business, isn't it? You just throw money, and then that if you can quantify your election win. If you spend this amount of money, you can get this amount of vote. I mean, but what's this about? But the hope is that the young generation, I can see lots of hope there, and I absolutely let them take over now, rather than wait for these people who are doing this this facade, and then this like showcasing things on TV. I mean, there's like funny story, like I teach Middle East politics, and I tend to bring these things again and again. During the first Gulf War, like 1990-91, when Kuwait was invaded by Saddam Hussein, there's a like French philosopher called Baudelaire. I mean, he was teaching in Stanford University during this time. So he wrote actually 3 articles. So this impending war will happen, okay? Because this is the most avoidable war. It's just one phone call from Bush Senior. Just ask Saddam Hussein, can you just leave? Rather, he decided to punish. Not to punish him because he's the dictator. He'll not be punished. The rule is, if you're a dictator, if there's a last sandwich left in Baghdad, it will be eaten by Saddam Hussein, isn't it? It's just the poor people. They're cowed, And during the whole situation, he wrote 3 articles for The Guardian. One is before the war. The article was like, the Gulf War will not happen. So that's his first article. When the Gulf War started, he wrote another article. He says the Gulf War is not happening. And once the war is finished, he wrote another article. The Gulf War did not happen. So you're talking about the war. I mean, what the hell is this? What this kind of, I mean, how can you call it war? So the casualties between, the coalition force, American force, is like 200 versus the minimum estimate is like 100,000. I mean, what kind of war is this? Can you call it a war? And like most of the America's casualties are like from friendly fire. So basically, they shoot down their own plane, basically. But you call it war. It's not war. So what he was making a case that, everything happened on actual TV. You never saw actual footage. What really happened on the ground? Everything is orchestrated on the news media at 5 o'clock every day, the press briefing. So that's happening in terms of, the way we are seeing, it's like, climate change is not happening. Climate change will not happen. And no, climate change did not happen. Those articles still, play a big role in my understanding about what we are actually doing. especially the powerful. I can sense it, what they're trying to do with like climate justice. They're destroying. If you see that all those evidences, this is destruction. This is vandalizing the very thing. And then you are seeing that this is space.
Well.
Sorry, it's not my talk. It's your talk. So.
No, it's about the dialogue, isn't it? Because it is. Yeah, you have a point there, and well, we have seen this with the war that we've had in Europe over the past year or so. It's there have been analysts calling it the third world war, but it's more like a world war wired in a way. We've been witnessing events. It's in a way that we haven't been able before, and that's why I'm constantly going back to the question of truth. We can no longer, and that's why I'm talking about the shift in public attitude. We can no longer be trapped very easily into disinformation, unless artificial intelligence interferes, of course. But in terms of narratives, the narratives that politicians construct, these can be questioned. There can be the gap between public expectation and what is delivered at these summits of theater, like the COPs. The gap, if they don't deliver, this gap is becoming more prominent in a way of what is the public expectation in the different parts of the world, whether it's the developed or developing world. Because the young generation, they also experience repercussions at a different level when it comes to health, pollution, and the health impact of pollution, or the health impact of climate change on various other environmental issues. It's not only chemophobia that we've been experiencing. There are real problems with the way that products are designed, with the way that they are labeled, in the way that they're offered. So this is something that I noticed and drew my attention at COP27. There was this attempt by a representative of a fossil fuel company. I have that reference somewhere here on my notes, but Vicky Hall, fossil fuel CEO. In the first days, so what she was saying, that those who call for the end of the oil and gas industry have no clue what that would mean. It is as if shifting the responsibility to the consumer from those companies to us. In a way, we don't appreciate the magnitude of that change that is needed to avoid climate catastrophe. And indeed, I don't accept that responsibility as a consumer, to be honest, because there needs to be more support at the level of the state when it comes to facilitating that transition. I'd like to have solar panels, but it's not easy to find information on that. It's not easy to have them fitted. And also with regard to products as well, it's not easy to purchase the greener products. So this has to be facilitated. And I can see it at the European Union level. There is change when it comes to legislative initiatives. For instance, standards on unification of cables is something that is recently, or when we talk about vehicles, zero-emission vehicles, this is something that came up again prior to COP27. So there are these small steps that we see here and there as well.
While you were talking, I'm just trying to see, so I just in a casual way, I just went to BBC web page, the front page. I found absolutely no news on COP27, not a single news.
Yes.
Absolutely none.
very difficult to follow. And I've been using Carbon Brief. This is a fantastic source, and on Twitter, and a Carbon Brief. They have had fantastic coverage, including of negotiations of the Paris Agreement, extremely specific ones as to the red lines of each negotiator or the preferences of each negotiator as well. And also now that this discussion on the draft text, this is where I found it, Carbon Brief. But you're right, I agree. It's very difficult to follow what's really happening.
So the news is like, climate change is not happening.
Well, in Britain, clearly Brexit is not happening.
Absolutely not happening.
There are no consequences whatsoever. So in Britain,
but I'm seeing like, there's a big headline about, what is it called? I'm a celebrity, get me out. Like, get me out from where?
This reminds me and takes me back to that childhood experience that we started our conversation with in 1986, the Chernobyl disaster. I was a child at the time, and in a state like Bulgaria, it was, information about the disaster was in fact organized out of the agenda, really. So there was no information on, anything. There was a 1st of May parade that my dad and I were participating in with flowers and everything, everybody in the city square. So there was a lack of transparency. The disaster was clearly not happening for us at the time. And also in terms of agricultural produce that we were purchasing, contaminated fruit and vegetables, repercussions at so many levels. So yeah, that is another experience that I recollect, and yeah, it somehow reminds me of what you were saying about climate change not happening. We're all a bunch of climate change deniers, aren't we?
Nothing is happening. So basically, just keep an eye on TV. You will have the everything you can get, about your existence, anything. And if you see TV or news media, absolutely nothing about what will happen if you heat like 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees. Absolutely nothing. Though it's one of those things will happen. Looks like will happen very soon, isn't it?
I'm afraid so. At least I don't watch TV.
I don't watch TV either, so.
That's why I think what I was saying, it is very important, our responsibility not to be disinformed, not to be misled, to be educated, not to be apathetic. There's no excuse, especially when it comes to survival. Nobody will ask for any excuses if you didn't know what was going on and what was at stake. And we do experience the consequences. Unfortunately, some places of the world earlier than others. If we think of the case of the low-lying states, the small island states, the Maldives, no holiday in the Maldives in the near future. That's probably the cynical take. But yeah, I think I'm trying to be optimistic here, Abdullah. I think there is a shift in the public attitude, and especially what you're saying with the young generation. They are keen to learn, to know about it, to take up roles within the policy sector and dealing with the environment. And also, I'm optimistic because the link between sustainability and the issues of environmental protection, of climate justice, and the economy is now not questioned to the extent that it was questioned before. Now, good, economic policy is underpinned by good environmental policy. We have that. impulse for circularity, you know, trying to get out of this, you know, take, make, dispose model of economic logic, that paradigm. So perhaps now, when it will be more profitable to be environmentally friendly, to be you know, socially more ethical, would be profitable, maybe then we will see that shift when it comes to, you know, business and politics. You know, and there's this joke that my husband likes telling. You know, in the past, when a child was lost, you would tell them, or if you try to warn them and give instructions what they should do if they get lost, we used to tell them, look for a mom with a pram, and you know, you can go and talk to them and seek help. And now perhaps we should be looking for a person with an electric vehicle, because this would be nowadays the moral person, the person who really uses,
but not like Tesla, you know.
No, it is about social media there. It's not about electric vehicles. It's about,
you know, it also depends like what kind of electric vehicle you are.
Yeah, I believe so. But perhaps in the coming years we'll be having more choice there, and it will hopefully be more accessible to the.
I mean, I'll just finish with like we have covered lots of things, because you know there's no, you know, there are no set rules in our talk today. It's unscripted, and I think we covered lots of things, your story, my story, but I think I tend to jump in quite frequently, so my apologies to you and to my audience when they will watch it. Like one like final story I'll tell is like one of my like favorite films like I've seen over the years is like, you know, this like Lars von Trier's film called Melancholia. I mean, it's not the film about climate change or anything, but I thought this is the most, you know, like good example about our climate situation. It did not talk about climate change, absolutely none in the film. It's telling a story of like two sisters, but at the same time, I'm not giving like too much a spoiler here, just like, you know, basic ones like two sisters. One is normal sister, and the other one sister is like she's suffering from depression, and so they're both. So they're telling a story of from these 2 points of view, how they are seeing these impending things will happen for this planet, because the planet is in the course of some kind of, you know, apocalypse. It will end, but it did not tell that whether this will end or not. So I'm not going to that story. But one of the comment, like because I mean the two sisters seeing it in a different way. The sister who is suffering from depression, she's more okay with the impending disaster will happen. But the other sister who is normal is really agitated. My God, you know, so like I live my life 50 years, but what will happen to my children? They will not have that opportunity to grow up and then enjoy their lives in this planet. And then the sister who suffers from depression, she made this very small comment. And I thought this is a really powerful comment. The comment was, she was saying that, why do you worry about this planet? This is an evil planet. And then I thought about that more, you know, in my own way, that what does she mean, that evil planet? This planet is not evil, isn't it? It's just the people who made it evil. So I'm not telling more about this. So that's my perception. It's not the planet, isn't it? It's us, what we are and what we have become.
Yeah, if we look at the history of the planet, humanity has been part of it only for a short time. If we look at the timescape of it, you know, there was a video that I saw produced by the British Geological Society, if I'm not mistaken. And, you know, it showed Dundee under a mass of ice, like 1,000 kilometers on the video. It's a simulation video. So in the scheme of things, humanity has not been on this planet forever. It may not remain on the planet forever, but Yeah, I think the spirit of humanity, there is room for goodness. There's room for goodness. There's room for empathy. There's room for love towards the planet and other human beings. So I think this is something perhaps sounds like a cliche, but something that we should count on.
Thank you so much, Petya.
Thank you. If we look at the sixth mass extinction when it comes to animal life, it's not, so many levels at which we have interfered. I can't call myself a tree hugger, but it is amazing what a human being can produce.
The way the world history is written, sometimes, the past 2000 years, all fighting with each other and killing each other. I kind of don't like that story. I think our ancestors' story is good. They've got lots of goodwill for the future generation. That's why we are still alive, isn't it? So they tried to do something which still made this planet like livable. So the ancestors had lots of goodwill. Then the question is like, what about our goodwill for the future generation? Because we'll be their ancestors, isn't it?
It is a lot about egoism, I suppose. Yeah, suicidal approach to the life of future generations, really. And that's why it features so much in all these policy documents, like, for instance, the Brundtland report, this idea of not only intragenerational, but also intergenerational equity. And it is not only about the words and the way these concerns are articulated, it is the actual care, as you said, for what would happen with our kids and their kids. But I think that part of this relates to the way we have dealt with facts, with environmental facts, and to what extent we have, to what we see as the truth, and how we change our attitudes in line with that understanding of what is true. And also how prepared we are to make sacrifices at various levels, how greedy we are.